Thanks. Yeah, so how do I kick off on this? Uh, as David said, I started as a data scientist, first for the military in Singapore as a geospatial analyst, sort of looking at terrain for the army. And I came to the UK, to London, and worked for public sector projects, also doing geospatial stuff, but lots of big data crunching, regressions for the Department of Education, Crossrail, and so on, right? And I started District 34 in 2018 on the basis of some really, with the, there's always a fear of starting a business, but when you believe in data like a nerd does, and when you see how clear the data is telling you that there's a need for such a business, it helps with the leap of faith, so to speak, right? What you have in front of you on your screens, which is on the web, so I can share the links after this event if you want them. But yesterday on the BBC, we had the health minister saying that nurses were already well paid enough as it is, and 1% pay rise is more than enough. And I just thought, I'll create a quick visualization of what a well-paid person on 35 grand a year, which is what nurses earn in London, the average salary, right? Where can these people afford to rent on 35 grand a year? So what you have here is a heat map of London at what they call MSOA level. And the heat map shows the percentages of disposable income that's spent on rent. And if you look at the rule of thumb, it tends to be 30% is what is affordable. And generally is what agents will look at, making sure you don't spend over 30% of your rent that you can afford to rent that property, right? What you see here is just pretty much 30% is anything in light green. So I think these are not even 30, these are slightly above 30%, right? But in sort of all areas of London on a 35 grand a year salary, there's no way you can, when you divide the median rent by the 35 grand a year salary, it comes up to anywhere from, say, here at 32.8% of disposable income to, if you go to central London, 123.2%. So more than your rent will be more than your income, right? So this is what where a well-paid person can afford to rent in London. And if you look at the other end of the coin, right, which is where a well-paid person can afford to buy, because of mortgage limits where you can only borrow up to 4.5 times your income, this is a heat map of where on a 35 grand a year salary, if you're limited to 4.5 times, that means you can roughly afford a property of about 5 times your income, right? So where in London can you afford to buy a property with 35 grand on 5 times your income? Again, the heat map is just basically 5 times is light pink. And I think there are some areas here. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, they're still above 5. Any 7.3, 7.1. Yeah, even in the outer zones in Barking and so on, you're still at sort of there's one here. Wembley East, 4.3%, 4.3 multiples, right? So coming into this scenario where we know that normal people, even the well-paid ones, can't really afford to live, to buy or rent in London, what we decided to set up District 34 for was, when we counted the numbers, there were about 2 million people in this sort of bucket where they were earning good salary, stable, but don't have the ability to afford London prices, right? And what we're seeing as well, if you do the math for these people, is that they were on the fast track to homelessness. Because while they were still young and 25 or 35 and so on, and they're still drawing a salary, that's okay, right? You can afford to pay 50% of your disposable income on rent. You'll still survive. You can still buy your pints and so on. But 1 grand a month is 12 grand a year. And 12 grand a year multiplied by 25 years is 300 grand, right? That is your pension pot that you have given away to your landlord if you rent for 25 years. And if you look at the Guardian article, which was recent, published by a parliamentary group, basically they're starting to predict that on a base case, there will be 630,000 households or roughly 1.34 million people who will end up becoming homeless when they retire. Because once the income stops, the rent doesn't stop. And you still have to find a place to live, right? And the words they used was inevitable catastrophe. And we are essentially set up to try and go against the inevitable catastrophe, right? So how do we do that? What the target demographic we've been working with are key workers, teachers, nurses. They tend to, we don't discriminate, but they tend to be heavily skewed towards minorities, women, Black people, ethnic minorities and minorities in general, right? Who have average incomes, but not just average, right? And how we do it is we provide them the data. So we've ingested the geospatial data and we show them the options they have compared to renting. So let me just give you some case studies here. This is Elizabeth. Oh, am I allowed to say her name? Anyway, yeah, I'm allowed. Is it Elizabeth? Draws a good income in London, but came to District 34 saying that, she thinks home ownership is 5-10 years away, and that her dream of buying a house in a nice part of town, scenic, she's a poet, right? And a scenic place is not possible. And what we said was, look, share with us your income, share with us how, your budget. Let's use the data to look for it, right? And that's the area where she ended up in. But let me show you the data that is behind this. So just close this. Can you guys see my screen? Oops. Ooh. So these are the 10,000 areas, small areas, right, called LSOAs, in London and in the 50-mile radius of London, which translates to about an hour's commute by train to an hour and a half, right? So when she gave us, when she told us a budget, she was looking for a house for 250 grand. And she thought it was impossible. But what we found when we did the analysis were there were 664 areas where the median house price for a house was less than 250. So she can't afford in that place, right? And then there were other things as well. She said about, oh, I need low crime and all that stuff. But one thing that stood out was she wanted a scenic place where she could draw inspiration from, right? And that set us thinking, how do you filter down these 664 areas by somewhere that has that scenic feel, that has the historic feel, and it was hard for me as a nerd. Everything's numbers. When you tell me about feel, what does that mean? And we ended up finding a very interesting data set, which is the list of all the cathedrals in London, in the UK, and merging it with this one. So of these 664 areas, which of them have a cathedral, right? And usually when you have a cathedral there, it shows that it's an old town, there's heritage, etc., etc. And that's where she ended up in. So going back to the PowerPoint, oops, I do not need to show this. She ended up in buying a house, a 4-bed house around here for her budget, and she's 45 minutes to her workplace, right? Second case study, young family, 2 kids, paying about 60% of the disposable income on rent for a 1-bed flat, really struggling to live, especially after COVID. In April, we posted them with VR goggles. That's our VR goggles there. And we had VR tours lined up saying, look at all these places. They give us their budget again. Let me just show you what we did for them. So again, same thing, a house for about 250 grand. This time they told us about, okay, we need to commute to King's Cross where we work. So areas where you can commute down to King's Cross. So just this, right? So these will be areas you can buy a house for 250 and be direct line to King's Cross. You have Stevenage, Letchworth, Biggleswade, etc. And then pair that with schools data. So which of these areas have, at least good and outstanding schools, right? And their kids were 5 to 10. So basically, we filtered it down by schools, filtered down by everything else, gave them the option set. Let me just show you what the VR looks like quickly. So yeah, this is Bagels Way. We went there, flew our drones, half an hour to London King's Cross, and allow them to use their true virtual reality, discover these towns, right? Same with Elizabeth. That's Rochester. Once she saw these two things, she fell in love with it, right? But being able to walk these towns, see them without having to spend 10, 20 pounds to go and view it, it's a massive thing because the cost of discovery is not insignificant for people on limited budgets, right? So yeah, saw this, viewed a few places, decided, that they could see themselves living somewhere. And yeah, now if you look at the photo, they're in a 3-bed house, room for the kids, gated parking. Yeah, and just the lives have, I think that they're the first in the family to ever own a property, and it's freehold. Yeah. So the part I just want to show you or demonstrate or kind of show what we were doing, how we're using data science and geospatial data and adding lots of other data onto it to try and dispel the myth that home ownership is out of reach, that anyone on 30 grand a year or a teacher should give up buying a home and consider renting for life. Because renting for life, for most people who don't have family wealth and so on, is a one-way ticket to eventually relying on the state for shelter. And with right to buy going on, that is not a safe option, right? So I think that's about, have I cleared? If I haven't done 20 minutes, I can keep boring people. Okay, so I still have some time. Let me just since this is a data science festival, and I'm sure I'm not the only nerd, there are some other nerdy people out there. Let me just show you how the model works, right? So, you have 10,000 areas, which are in London, of which there are 4,800, and outside London is about 5,200. And being able to filter by affordability, by budget, by the commute, for example. So, for example, some people want to be, they want to be on a certain line. That can be done, right? So Northern Line, that's all the areas within a 1 mile half a mile radius or walking distance to a Northern Line station. You can go by location scores. So the MHCL, the area scores. So the government actually publishes a lot of very small area data that's related to crime, for example. So super safe areas, you can filter, that doesn't change much, but, areas with super low crime, that can be a filter as well. There's schools data which can be merged to it. So if your child is just born and you're already thinking about schools, these are all the areas with at least one outstanding school for a child of 0 to 5, right? Amenities, and so being close to a public park or supermarket or restaurant, diversity as well. So this was one that came through our user feedback, but a lot of people said, no, I do not want to be the only Chinese person here, right? And that we have the data for that from the census to say, what percentage of Chinese people there are. And they say, okay, it's okay if 1 in 20 people are Chinese. Then we can filter by, ethnicity, for example. And post-COVID, broadband is another big thing now. So, with ingested broadband speeds and be able to say, okay, if broadband is a key part, this is where to go. And once we hit a certain number of results, we send this to our members or to the person, right? So a map showing the areas and a table showing the area, the demographics, the postcodes, the nearest station, and all the other good stuff around it. And so what this does is it gives them the confidence, right? Same as with me, the confidence through data to make that leap, because they're being asked to relocate from zone 2 where they rent to somewhere potentially in zone 4 or out of London. And to have that data to say, look, this is all solid, legitimate data from the government that says this area is safe. You can use that postcode, search on Zoopla, and buy a house there and know you're close to a good school, etc., means that for the first time, someone earning 35 grand a year thinks that holy crap, I've got 20 options instead of it's either rent or nothing. So I hope this was interesting. Am I allowed to stop now? I don't know. Have I done 20 minutes?
Am I allowed to stop now? I feel like we're forcing John to share his wonderful knowledge with us. Mate,
no, happy to share. I've been told I talk too much, especially when I start talking about data.
Absolutely perfect, and I absolutely loved it. And I do feel a little bit like 20 minutes was tip of the iceberg. So it could be that we use this as a kicking off point, and perhaps we get you back in the future as well. But first and foremost, I absolutely loved the presentation. Even, from the very start, when you were kind of like, I was scared to start this business, but I looked at the data and it needed to be there. So just taking that sort of data-driven approach, really, really good. There's a few questions coming in, so we will spend 5 or 10 minutes just to go through a few questions. One thing I would say, if you are a nerd and you enjoyed John's talk, perhaps just ping a little message into the chat and just say thanks. And yeah, I'm a nerd. Cheers, John. We're with you, sort of thing, which is good.
I love the nerds. Yep.
So I've got one quick question myself, and then we'll jump to the ones coming in. In terms of District 34, I mean, it's clear you've built a fantastic platform there, very valuable data. How, or do you even do this? How do you ensure that the data is being used by first-time buyers and isn't being used by investors to capitalize on all the good work that you've done?
It's a good question. Well, we design it into our business processes. So on all our forums and events, we're very clear to say, look, we're not interested to share this data with investors, right? And to be honest, there are lots of these other companies that provide data for for investors, so they wouldn't be coming to us anyway. But one thing we don't want to happen is for other people to say, okay, you'll find that pretty much investors and landlords have the same criteria as first-time buyers, right? Where it's cheap, it's good, lots of young people are moving there, I want to buy there, right? And we don't really want that to happen because you can see many buildings in London where at night all the lights are turned off because they're just owned by investors, right? And another thing is the focus of analysis, because the data is a lake. What we do is we visualize it, we analyze it, and we deliberately do not analyze the stuff that investor will care about, like rents, all that stuff. We don't don't do analysis around that, because that will be useful for a landlord, but not useful at all for a first-time buyer.
Perfect. Sounds good, John. Sounds good. A few comments that have just come in, just to highlight them dead quickly. Harmeet, Hamad, Andrew, Yasmin, Matt, all saying fantastic presentation. Thank you very much.
Ooh, thank you.
Joanna, absolutely loved it. And you've got a new customer there. She's just signed up for District 34. So that's good. Yeah. Jumping into the Q&A, first question at the top of the list there. You can actually open the Q&A and perhaps follow along yourself if you'd like to do. First question is from David. Any chance of applying the model elsewhere, e.g. around Oxford, where it's even less affordable than London? Are you just focused in London? Have you got plans to expand?
Well, we've been asked this, right? And yeah, it's definitely possible. So we can build an Oxford-centric one. And what you find is there's these, London is not unique. Oxford is one of them. Cambridge is one of them. Where because they're all towns with the green belt, and there's lots of really high paid employment in them, that they become just totally unaffordable first-time buyers. We can rebuild this model to an Oxford-centric model, and then share with people who want to buy, want to be part of Oxford, but can't afford to pay the ticket price, right? So the answer is yes. And if that's something that you are interested in, drop me a note. It'll be easy for us to just reorient it for Oxford.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm going to skip on to the next question then, coming from Tiffany. Tiffany's asking more about the source of the data. So she's asking, where do you source all of the data from? Census doesn't conduct regularly. do you think your data might be out of date? So how do you approach collecting and collating this information?
Yeah, so she's right. The census data is about 10 years old now. It is 10 years old. But what the government have done is they've modeled estimates. So it's not, they would have some model estimates for 2019, 2020. So we use those model estimates for, say, diversity and ethnicity. The other data sets we use are from the land registry. So price paid data, for example, which is updated every month. We also use data from any sort of source we can find. So the crime data is from the deprivation data that comes from the Ministry of Housing, Communities, and Local Government, MHCLG. That's a very rich data set as well at a small level, and that is 2019. So yeah, we're pretty we're pretty confident that the data we have is relevant and not too old, especially the price paid data, which is updated every month. So we know that pricing there is fine.
Sounds good. Sounds good. We'll jump onto the question there from Hazel. Hazel starts off by saying, this looks great. Does the tool take into account the amount of deposit available?
Yes. So I didn't show the sheet, but there's, we send them. Nowadays, it's so complicated to buy a house, right? You've got Help to Buy, you've got 95% mortgages coming out. We've built a Google Sheets model template that we send out to, you fill in a form and you get that template back and you can start playing with the numbers. What we find is most people have the capacity to build that deposit they need, but they haven't done it yet. Because when you've given up ever owning a place, you kind of want to drown your sorrows in alcohol and Uber Eats. But when you show them that, hey, if you had, if you could save a 10 grand deposit, here are all the 200 grand houses you can buy that bring you half an hour into London. What we've heard is their savings rates jump by, they go from saving nothing to saving 1.5 grand a month.
Yeah.
And obviously COVID helped, right? But the answer is yes, we do consider the deposit, including the deposit they do not have yet, if that makes sense. So showing them, okay, based on your income, this is your maximum mortgage, but to maximize that mortgage, you need to have a minimum deposit of 5 or 10%. This is how much you need. And if you use a lifetime ISA, for example, you can get there 25% faster. Perfect.
Makes sense. Yeah, you're providing the motivation as well, which is good to see. It's good to see. We'll take the question from Hamid. I hope I've understood it properly. But he's saying, in terms of the model, how have you published it? Do people access it through a website? Is it an application? How is the model published?
So far, it's published in the cloud, but behind a gateway, because we used a sort of off-the-shelf solution to visualize it. We're actually looking to build a publicly available tool now, just that you can go to the internet and use it. But my skills don't extend to web development. So we're struggling a bit on that front. So if there are any web developers here who'll be interested to bring this model out of our systems onto the web, please let me know as well. But the idea is so right now what we do is we let people book sessions with the District 34 team, and I and my colleagues, we go through the model with them and we export the results for them to use.
Okay, makes sense. Right, we've got 2 minutes left and I'm going to pick 2 more questions. So we're going to go super quick here, John. First question is from Julia. Great talk, thanks. What software tools did you use or would you recommend for something similar? So what does the tech stack look like, and how have you built it?
The geospatial analysis, that can be done in QGIS, which is open source. Mm-hmm. The data joining and crunching, that you can do it all open source, right? Because the land registry and all these places allow you to download the entire data set every month. That means you can plug into a SQL database and do your left joins and your spatial joins there. PostgreSQL with a PostGIS extension will allow you to ingest spatial data as well. And there's lots of free open spatial data from the government through I think it's the Geo portal from the ONS. So that's the type of tech stack that you need to do this.
Okay, fantastic. We have got to time, so I'm going to wrap things up a little bit there. John is on Twitter. We shared his Twitter handle, and we've also shared his LinkedIn as well. So I'm sure John will be happy to hear from anyone if I didn't get to your question. Just one final, obviously, thanks from me, John. It was super interesting. You've built a fantastic business there, and thanks for coming and sharing with the Data Science Festival.
No, thanks for having me.
Thanks very much.
Yep.
Cheers, John.
I'll shut up now.
Thank you, mate. Cheers. If John turns off his camera, I'll get Matt to turn on his camera, and we'll get into part 2. In terms of Matt's background, Matt is the CEO at Access Earth. They are building the world's largest database of accessibility information, and have been up and running now for, I believe, about 5 years. So welcome along, Matt. How's your day going your end?
Oh, it's been great. I mean, I honestly don't know how I'm going to follow that presentation.
He did a good job. I'm imagining there could be some collaboration between you two guys afterwards as well, eh? Build it into District 34. So if I could, I'm going to keep things moving quite quick, Matt, conscious of time. So I'll maybe get you to share your screen. Exact same format. Matt's going to share roughly 20 minutes of content with us. Guys, please, it is meant to be interactive. So yeah, do use the chat and do use the Q&A. And if you're happy, Matt, I'll get out of the way and catch you for some questions at the end.
Yeah, so as I said, I'm Matt. I'm the CEO and founder of Access Earth. And just as a bit of background for me, so I have cerebral palsy, which means I use a rollator or a walking frame to kind of get around the place. And sort of and we're based in Ireland. So I found, growing up in Ireland and, going to college and, going on holidays and things like that, I found it was very difficult for me to find places with reliable accessibility information. This was back in, say, 2012 when I was coming out of college and coming in and doing my master's. And I'd switched from chemistry into computer science because I realized I was, I liked chemistry. Chemistry didn't like me, so I switched into computer science, which is something I was always sort of very passionate about. And there's one particular event where I went, I think it was to London actually, booked a hotel. They said they were wheelchair accessible. Get there and there's 3 steps up to the entrance, and I couldn't fit the rollator inside the room. So I thought, okay, look, there has to be, there has to be data out there or somewhere for people to keep this data up to date. So while I was in college, entered a few competitions and developed kind of the first prototype of Access Earth, which is sort of at its core, kind of for the users, what it is still today, is about providing and crowdsourcing accessibility information, mainly in the physical space at the moment. But from that, we've then, kind of gone on from there. And as David says, we've been in business 5 years now. We were backed by Enterprise Ireland once I graduated. And I kind of knew, I mean, from John's example, he was looking at the data, saying that there's a ton of data available. I was kind of looking at it going, okay, data is very disparate. It's in a lot of different places. And also for me, it'd be very helpful for me to know, restaurants or hotels I can go to in different cities. And it seems a bit weird to say that in sort of, in COVID times at the moment. But, for me, it's like just being able to know where you can go safely within your city was incredibly important to me. And so it started that out. And now we sort of progressed into sort of 3 main areas where we're not just a data gatherer. So we help to kind of reduce the time for both users and businesses in kind of gathering and providing this information. But we also are now aggregating out of our kind of initial sort of beta crowdsourcing app. We're now bringing in data from county councils and other sort of data providers as well. And then we're helping to sort of collate that data into an easy to understand sort of check ticker X type format, so that you can easily sort of see whether a place is accessible to your needs. Because me being in a rollator has different needs. Someone in a wheelchair, someone in electric wheelchair as well. So we're sort of providing that data out to core customers. And as of last year, with COVID, we realized that has quite quickly become accessibility information in and of itself. There's parts of society who are still cocooning here in Ireland at the moment. We're in level 5, where you're not allowed to go outside your 5-kilometer radius and only to go to the shops or a local pharmacy. So finding out, for example, places that are abiding, have hand sanitizer station checkpoints, or that there's, in larger areas that there's temperature checkpoints, or is there PPE provided? All of this has now come front and center into what we're looking to provide for people. And this was back to the core of what we were doing previously. Was we were looking at things like accessible parking or accessible entrances for wheelchairs and bathrooms, and in tandem with hotels, restaurants, and shops. When they begin to open, they need to open responsibly. So tying in COVID information was it was a key pivot that we made last year. And so it's all about, essentially increasing that consumer confidence, so that not only can you get into the place when it's not going to be safe to do so, but can you do it in a responsible manner as well? So our solution kind of comes in, as I said, kind of 3 separate kind of flavors really. In our data gatherer, we're using a mixture of the mobile app that we had originally, and we're using AI as a means of augmenting that information. So we're starting to use space tech and deep learning, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail later on, and then sort of aggregating and collating that information out to our core customer groups, which would be the likes of, say, universities or smart city organizations or large venue operators like football stadiums, and then using those analytics to then provide not just, say, the building managers with that information, but then also for their core users with a kind of a plugin, so that, say, fans coming into the stadium can know exactly where they need to go and how they can do that responsibly and easily and safely. And then also, how can we then use that, take the feedback from the user and their experience and bring that back to the venue provider in a way that they can make easy changes to make the experience better. Like, for example, whether they need to know to put more hand sanitizer stations out, or that the accessible bathroom is quite difficult to find past the lift, things like that. And really, this all kind of came back from the crowd and kind of our user base. It's all kind of core to our kind of solution, really, and how we want to help people. We want people to be able to, anyone can contribute to this data set, to be able to keep it as up to date as possible. And so, like, mapping events and crowdsourcing was where we started. This would have been in 2018 or early 2019, or 2018, early 2019, when we did the 2 events on the right. The top one would be in Trinity, where we helped local the new postgraduate students coming in from internationally to kind of get to know the city. We got a group of them together to use the app and go out to different areas. So Grafton Street, O'Connell Street, and Pearse Street, which is the main if any of you have been to Dublin, they're very popular streets for like shopping and things like that. They're also directly around the college. And so it got them out not only to think about accessibility, because a lot of them hadn't used the device before, but it was also about getting them to know the area as well, and also to know people, because it's the events we did in the past, they were group events. It was a very kind of fun sort of training exercises as well, getting people to know about accessibility, like how wide a door is, for example, how wide should it be for a wheelchair user. And then as well in London, we had the brilliant opportunity to, when Microsoft opened their experience store in Oxford Circus, we had 130 Microsoft Store volunteers kind of come to us and say, hey, we want to go out to central London and in Piccadilly and Paddington and start rating these places. And we gave them 2 hours. Of course, it was raining. Every single one of these events we've done in the past, it's rained. And they came back and they just covered about 2,500 places in the 2 hours, even with the rain. And it was absolutely, like, the feedback we got was absolutely fantastic. A lot of it was, oh, I never realized I'd been to this place before 1,000,000 times. Didn't notice there were 2 steps down to the entrance, or I didn't notice that the bathroom was down a flight of stairs. So it's not just about providing information for people who need it. It's about, broadening the perspective and making people aware that accessibility is important for everyone. And so with COVID, and now how could we kind of adapt this model going forward in a responsible way? So the photo on the left is taken in Philadelphia, which is actually the city where we did our first ever mapping event in like mid 2017, where the occupational therapist who's in the picture had actually reached out to us saying for her birthday party she wanted to do something that was different and would contribute to the city. So she contacted us on Facebook randomly to say, hey, you wouldn't happen to be in Philadelphia in May for some reason. It just so happened that we were planning on going to a trade show for accessibility at the time. So we were able to adjust schedules and get this mapping event in place. And we had about 200 places rated over the hour. And Philly has become one of our main hotspots for information, where now it's nearly 3,000 accessibility points of information in businesses within Philly. And then we sort of came back last summer in the height of COVID to the OT and think like, okay, how can we help from a COVID perspective? Because we just added in the criteria. We want to be able to make sure that, we could help the local businesses as well as the local population. So we came up with this idea of this window sticker that you can sort of see in the bottom corner there about businesses to just kind of promote the app, as well as kind of from the business perspective to promote sort of COVID accessibility as well. So we ran the campaign for a week there last month, and while also getting data from the city, from local streeteries and temporary businesses, we've been able to get about 700 businesses on the app currently within Philly for COVID information alone, which is a fantastic starting point to show that we can get businesses more aware of accessibility through providing safety information with COVID. I think that's something that we're really keen to demonstrate. And we're looking at taking that prototype and progressing that out across the city now in the next few months. But going from crowdsourcing into AI, there's a thing that was always playing on my mind. So I'm a computer scientist, but I was never really a data scientist. And I always think to myself, well, how can this be done ethically and in the most responsible way? And so we've worked a lot with Microsoft in the past and have continued to right up through our entire journey. And they're really keen on sort of the ethical and responsible use of AI. So we were lucky enough to be on their first AI for Good cohort in 2019. As well as that, I had the opportunity to sit on the next gen panel for the Aspen Initiative UK on the responsible use and how AI can work for humanity. So really, this has been, AI and ethics to me go hand in hand. How, since that's how, 9 out of 10 new AI projects come into it with some form of bias. And I think that it's really important to kind of address that conversation, have that conversation on the importance of sort of unbiased data sets, particularly when you're looking at vulnerable populations, as to how you can, make sure you're using the correct data in the best possible way. So kind of with that in mind, our first sort of kind of foray into AI was also getting to use space tech. So we've partnered with the European Space Agency and their Business Incubation Center to get to use satellite imagery to detect where parking spaces are, or using the wheelchair symbols of accessible parking spaces are within a given environment. I'd found in Dublin it was impossible to find places. So for me, we were lucky enough then to go to Smart Sandyford, which is a small district within Dublin. They came to us to say, hey, we heard what you want to do with satellite imagery. We're only aware of one spot within the district that's council aware. Can you sort of scan a district with what you want to do and see if you can find more? So essentially, we took in the imagery. We then had to clean it, in a sense, and then sort of segment that image into a grid, and then began to train our model to recognize the wheelchair symbol in different angles, different lightings, and things like that, to results in a classifier. Again, we all did this using Microsoft's tech to then ingest Smart Sandyford. And I'm now intimately familiar with that part from an aerial perspective, something I never thought I would say. But we then got to run that through our classifier, and at the end of that project, we'd realized there wasn't just the one spot within Smart Sandyford. There were about over 170. But from the council's perspective, the 160 out of these were private parking, so they just weren't aware of that. And interestingly, one of the big points of that was how disparate the wheelchair symbol is. And I probably should put up some symbols here, some differences here, but the different colors. And I'd assumed that the wheelchair parking symbol was a stencil or a template that used. No, it's drawn freehand. So that was something that we had to take into account when we were training our model, start to recognize the wheelchair symbol. And it was actually a really, really cool project, and thought that we can now sort of build on that going forward. So the next stage in how we wanted to look at information was, okay, so we have the core information about a building in terms of the questions that we're answering. Then we look at the parking. We want to see, well, particularly for large venues, and now with COVID, what's it like inside the building? So this last year, just that last month, actually, at the beginning of the year, we kind of got together and thought, okay, how can we help large venue operators during COVID? And we came up with the idea, again, partnering with Microsoft and with the Autodesk Foundation. We have been able to ingest floor plans, architectural floor plans, and present them in a sort of map style format, and overlay icons onto this so that users can see exactly where, for example, the one-way systems are, the accessible entrances, but also where the hand sanitizer stations are within a building. This particular building is actually one of the universities within Ireland, one of the campuses. They said they want to be able to find a way to responsibly bring back students, and so sort of let us get access to this for demo purposes. There's something that we're kind of really excited about, with how we can help with our core customers on the local authority and sports side of things as well, as to how we can really sort of push that side, the inside as well, because it's a really powerful kind of connection, going from that sort of seat to seat connection, both for students and fans. And it's something that we're really excited about, and just kind of started to talk about this now. As I said, the main business model for us is on local authorities and sports clubs. For local authorities, we've done this single event reports on, say, for example, where your parking spaces are within an area, but now with sports clubs and sort of multi-venues and government bodies in general, we're beginning to provide a license to the cloud infrastructure and data that we have to look at the I say from smart cities, look at digital itinerary and internal floor maps of public buildings, but also area accessibility analysis, give an idea of how many accessible hotels, restaurants, coffee shops there are within an area, so that they can identify and work with local businesses, and do more with the data that in a lot of cases they didn't know they had. And so, I just want to kind of finish up with kind of where we were and sort of where we plan to be. So we've been in business about 5 years, but we only started trading in 2018. In 2019, hit the milestone of over 100,000 places on the system rated by our users. Then last year, we developed this sort of AI satellite data example with a couple of Irish smart cities, as well as COVID-19 criteria. And then this year, we're looking at bringing in sensory and cognitive criteria, as well as sort of doubling to 200,000 locations worldwide, and bringing in internal floor maps as well. And then looking at next year, we're looking at bringing the parking to be real time, using a mixture of either beacons or fast path satellite imagery to be able to analyze and give recommendations to users when they're going places to look for the parking space that may be free at the time. And we're hoping to have over 1 million places on the platform, both either mapped internally or through our users or via COVID. But essentially, we want to enable everyone to Access Earth. And thank you very much for listening to me ramble the last 18 minutes or so. That's me. Yep, delighted for any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matt. That was fantastic. I know you said at the start, how am I going to follow John? But I can tell you safely, you've done a good job there, mate. You've managed it. Which was great. Personally, yeah, I've learned quite a bit there listening along, and I've got a couple of questions to kick things off. But equally, if there are any from the audience, please do shout out. One of the things I was just going to highlight actually is we have a chat between the moderators behind the scenes, and one of the comments from Jess was that these talks give me hope for humanity. Which I think sums things up quite nicely. It's really enjoyable doing this Data for Good month, and I know I keep saying that, but it's 100% true. In terms of following on from your talk there, the crowdsourcing model obviously makes so much sense in terms of being able to collect all this data from all these different sources. It definitely must have been a big impact of people not being out and about as much. How has that been? And what are the kind of challenges you faced over the last year, I guess?
Yeah, I think that the biggest challenge, of course, is, originally we'd have done this with a large group of people, got them together and scattered them throughout the city in groups. And that just wasn't something we could do responsibly. And, we kind of figured out, okay, how can we do this virtually? How can we do this? How can we deliver the training virtually? How can we encourage people to go out when it's safe to do so? That's kind of what we did in Philly. We kind of flipped it on its head and looked at how could we get businesses to provide the information as a foundation, and then as customers started to come back, get them to open up and keep that data up to date. So it's about getting the businesses to provide confidence back to the consumer, and then the consumer to keep providing feedback to the businesses.
And is that your plan moving forward, almost to do it location by location, city by city, and grow organically? There are people listening to this now that can download your app and start, as things go back to normal, people can start providing this information to you little by little, wherever they are? Or
exactly, wherever they are. We've been able to grow this organically throughout all over the world, and we look to really kind of focus on certain cities at times, but really any data, like if there was just one restaurant in every city in the world, that would be useful to somebody. And even if that was the case, like any bit of data on this is incredibly important to someone. Not just me or or anyone with accessibility needs, but also parents with prams or anyone getting older. This is information that's essentially needed by everybody at some point in their lives. So yeah, I encourage anyone to download the app and provide me feedback.
I will be doing it. Watch this space. You'll find Milton Keynes will be slowly getting mapped. I'll be a one-man mapping machine. We're on it. I guess you talked briefly there about smart cities. Building new towns and new cities. It's a fantastic opportunity to do things properly from the beginning. Have you had any successful use cases within the smart city space, and what has been their reaction in terms of those type of collaborations?
Yeah, so we've had kind of, apart from the Smart Sandy, for example, we've had good connection on the COVID piece. It seems that smart cities have really sort of latched onto the idea of this on the internal mapping. So a few of the county councils within Ireland, and we're in touch with a few in the UK, have really kind of come to the idea of, safety has been a big concern for this. And, one of the big things about a lot of today's urban environments is they tend to be designed for mid-20s right-handed males, and that is not the majority of the population. And that's something it's kind of taken a global pandemic for a lot of the smart local authorities to kind of figure out, okay, safety is the #1 concern here. So yeah, we've had great success on that with the internal mapping piece, and we hope to produce a use case on that now in the next few months.
Amazing. And I guess a couple of questions in one really then. What are the, what is the biggest challenge you're facing at the moment? Is it a technical challenge, or is it a case of not marketing, but, getting the word out there? Is it a case of getting the data? What's the biggest pain points for you at Access Earth? What are you working to solve, internally most?
So I think it's kind of twofold, really. You've got that, there's the marketing, and then there's the data side. We sort of are beginning to look at, and so we're looking at AI and data aggregation to augment the data side, but it's also, it's letting people know that this resource is available, or that accessibility information is available to begin with. You know, whether it's, you know, what we're looking to do with customers is essentially white label this information and provide it out to them on their websites. So the ultimate goal, you know, if we essentially become invisible, but provide this information in the future, you know, that is, you know, the ultimate goal is getting this information. And that's the biggest challenge, is becoming sustainable, and then, you know, finding ways that we can provide that.
Yeah. And do you look at, or are you looking at any other collaborations? Obviously, you've talked about that Microsoft partnership there. You know, just off the top of my head, I was, you know, thinking if there's collaboration with TripAdvisor and people are leaving the reviews anyway, can you crowdsource through that way? Have you got anything else in the pipeline in terms of collaborations?
Yeah, so we're looking at, you know, always looking at different partners and that, and, you know, we're looking particularly in the large event space and, you know, international event space and sports as well, as they become more and more, you know, open up throughout the next couple of years. That, you know, so the Centre for Accessible Football in Europe is one of our key partners in this. So kind of, you know, I'm a big football fan, and you know, stadiums are one of the most inaccessible venues at the best of times for people. So, you know, I think getting collaborations within the sports as well as smart cities and sort of, yeah, TripAdvisor as well, those kind of companies would be key too.
Fantastic. And in terms of, it's not necessarily a technical question, but in terms of Access Earth, as you mentioned, you've been running for 5 years, and you've done a phenomenal job in those 5 years. What does the wider team look like? And I guess pulling in a question here from Sajni in the audience, if people do want to volunteer and help, is that an option? So yeah, I guess twofold. What does the team look like there, and are you looking for volunteers?
Yeah, so we're a small team. So we've got 4 full-time members at the moment, and yeah, the answer is yes. We're always looking for volunteers. I mean, the event we did in Philly, that was ran and done by 3 volunteer students and an OT on the ground. Like, you know, kind of to get what we'd like to call them as Access Earth ambassadors, to be able to go into a city and kind of, like, you know, talk to local businesses, and, you know, we can give them the window stickers and things like that to kind of get the businesses aware that accessibility is important too. Yeah.
And in terms of the volunteering side of things, do you ever have a requirement? I'm guessing quite a lot of our audience are, you know, data scientists and have skills in those areas. Do you ever look for volunteers from the technical side of things to perhaps build some of these models that now you're working with?
Definitely. I mean, like, as a team, we are kind of looked to get into the AI space, and the data science and the data scientist role is something that we are very interested too, as to how we can, you know, get further insight from the data that we're gathering. Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic. Well, I'm conscious of time. We're two minutes before the close, so I am going to wrap things up with a little bit of thanks, obviously, to both of our speakers, John and Matt, for giving up their time. As Jess has mentioned on the back end, it does give you a lot of hope, and hopefully all you guys in the community have enjoyed, you know, listening to these guys. And I think, you know, if you can, you know, doing your bit as well, it is sharing these talks and getting the message out there. You know, share it with your network, share it with your friends, and let's keep these conversations going. And I will wrap it up with the one final comment from Mark in the question. He's basically said, "This is not a question. That was effing awesome, Matt. Top work, and a great use of image recognition." So I think that kind of sums things up. So just super quickly, if John, if you are still there, maybe just get you to turn your camera on, and yeah, thank you both for giving up your lunchtime. It's been absolutely fantastic, and hopefully we can get you back in the future, and we can see what you guys are doing going forward.
Matt, I'm glad I went first.
Matt came in strong at the end, John. I like it. Awesome.
I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad I went first. Well done. That is amazing. Like, hats off.
Oh, thanks to you. And the same to you, John. It's all relative, right? Isn't it? We're all doing great things.
I wish we were now stood in the same room, perhaps having a cold beer and a slice of pizza, but those days are coming, and we'll make that happen in the future. So once again, thank you both. Thank you, Jess and Amy, for organising and making this happen. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and hopefully we'll see you at next week's webinar as well. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.